Friends, good morning and welcome to this lecture series of geomorphology. And in this class, we will talk about the weathering and its type and its products and its utility. So, what exactly it means that in the last class, we are talking something about the weathering and erosion, and finally, we concluded weathering is the simply breaking down of rocks, and erosion, once we say, that means here a considerable distance of transportation is associated. Until unless the rock is transported from its place of weathering, then there is no question of shape change, landscape development, because once the material is broken down from this original position and it remains there, that means there is no mass movement. So, until unless there is mass movement, there is no question of landscape evolution. So, whatever the landscapes we nowadays see in the earth crust, like the Himalayas, like the Alps, like these plains, like these plateaus, like these oceans, all they are related to weathering and erosion. And if you remember, we are talking something about this paleogeographic history, paleogeographic changes. Generally, the paleogeographic changes that also involved in the mass movement. So, whenever there is a change in geography means there has to be mass movement, otherwise there will be no question of changing geography. But the medium may be river, it may be snow, it may be then something like wind. So, irrespective of their mode of transport, the material has to be transported even if the gravity. Okay. So, that is why weathering alone cannot change the topography, erosion must have to be involved, so that the topographic changes can take place. So, today we are going to discuss about the types of weathering. Weathering generally, it is in broad sense, it can be divided into three parts. One is mechanical weathering, second is chemical weathering, and third is biological weathering. It does not mean once we say mechanical weathering, that means other two are not working at that particular geological environment. So, that means I want to say, to reduce a rock, to form the topography, to change the topographic perception, there may be three types of weathering, they all together work, and there are certain geological conditions, certain environmental conditions, where one type of weathering dominates over others. So, that does not mean other two types of weathering are not working. And if you remember, we are talking something about rock cycle. Rock cycle, three types of rock form, and finally, due to weathering and erosion, one type of rock is converted to other types. Mostly in weathering erosion, these sedimentary rocks are the product. Igneous, metamorphic, as well as earlier sedimentary rock, they get eroded, they get transported, they get deposited, and finally, these sedimentary rocks are formed. So, mostly, so we can say the sedimentary rock are the product of weathering and erosion. And soil formation is prominently by weathering product. Until unless there will be no weathering, there will be no soil formation, no food grain productions. So, weathering has direct and indirect effect in our daily life. So, let us elaborate what is this mechanical weathering, what is that chemical weathering, and what is biological weathering. Mechanical weathering, if you see here, is the breakdown of rocks into solid fragments by physical process. Chemical composition of the rock not altered, it has to be understood here. It is simply breaking down of rocks physically, either it is man made physical, that means a man suppose we hammer this rock into fragments. Suppose for example, we take limestone for example. In the limestone, if we hammer it from larger piece to smaller piece, again smaller piece, again smaller piece, again smaller piece. So, if you take the last piece of this rock, it will be called limestone. That means, here this chemical composition of this rock, it is not getting changed. So, that is why physical weathering means simply breaking down of rock from larger size particle to smaller size particle without changing its chemical composition. For example, mass movement from hill. So, hill is a large body of rocks. From here one fragment, one slice, one slide, one mountainous spur, it comes down. It is simply physically breaking down, physically coming out. So, here is no chemical compositional changes occurs within the rock. So, that is called physical weathering or it is called mechanical weathering. In this figure, if you see here, this is the granite body. Within the granite body, it is converted into two parts. So, that means, here this part is also representing granite, this part also representing granite. Similarly, if you see these smaller particles, smaller fragments, again even smaller fragments. So, they are also representing the granites. So, that means, here I want to say simply it is mechanically breaking down of earlier rocks to smaller and smaller fragments. This is called physical or mechanical weathering. Then next come to chemical weathering. Chemical weathering means it is the chemical decomposition of minerals and rocks. Chemically decomposition, here the composition changes. Composition changes means, for example, suppose we take limestone, again limestone calcium carbonate, here calcium will be separated and carbonate will be separated. That means, here chemically the rocks are getting separated, the chemical constituents are getting separated. This is called chemical weathering. So, chemical weathering and physical weathering, they may work together, they may work differently. So, depending upon the atmospheric condition, depending upon this environment in which the rock occurring, depending upon the process involved, the physical and chemical weatherings are distinguished. For example, if you see these rocks, these fragments, these fragments, they are removed from this rock. So, this is chemical weathering, it is not fragments. They are soluble materials earlier existing within rock. Due to reaction with their water, you see this is water is existing here, or even the water vapor, it interacts with the rock. So, due to interaction with the water, due to interaction with the water vapor, chemically the rock is altered. Finally, the soluble products, they come to solution and remain in the solution form within that water for certain geological time, until and unless a favorable condition arrives, when the EH/pH condition, when the oxidation conditions comes, this rock precipitate. Like our limestone precipitation. Limestone is precipitated from sea water during this EH/pH, some EH/pH conditions within that water. So, this calcium carbonate, earlier it was a part of a rock, it came to solution and remain within the sea water. Due to change in EH/pH condition, this calcium carbonate precipitate in rock and finally limestone formed. Again, once the limestone formed within the sea water, it remains there. Due to removal of the sea, due to drying up of the sea, or due to tectonic upliftment, it comes to the surface, again it reacts with the atmospheric condition, finally this calcium carbonate again go to the solution. So, this is the chemical weathering process. So, chemical weathering, it is the chemical change, chemical constituents change of this rock. So, this is called chemical weathering. Reaction occurring between minerals in rock and the environment. It is important. Mineral constituents of the rock and environment. So, chemical weathering will occur or not occur, that will depends upon the chemical composition of this rock as well as the chemical behavior of the existing environment. For example, that we are discussing here limestone, they are very much prone for chemical weathering. If during acid rain, suppose for example during raining we have carbon dioxide, it is mixed with water, it reacts with the limestone terrain. So, that is why the limestone getting easily dissolved. That is why most of this limestone terrain go for dissolution due to chemical weathering. Okay. So, it is the mineral and the environment, it is the reaction between these two. So, finally, the chemical weathering product that will again come in the solid form when the existing EH/pH condition changes, when the favorable environment again reoccurs. Then third type of weathering, that is called biological weathering. Here biological elements, biological ingredients that are involved in rock fragmentation, like plants, like animals, like human, all this biological activity. If you see here this earthworm, it is very much responsible for biological weathering. So, that means it remains within the soil profile and this create the soil profile more porous and more permeable. Similarly, this type of plants, this type of rooted plants, if you see here during plant growth the rock is getting fragmented, they are fractured. So, that is biological weathering. That means biological agents are involved. So, now question arises, if this biological materials or biological elements or agents they are involved in the rock fragmentation. So, that does not mean the other type of weathering processes. So, that does not mean this rock is not reacting with this existing environment condition. That does not mean the rock is not expanding during daytime and contracting during night time due to cooling and thermal expansion. So, that means I want to say, though biological agents are involved in rock fragmentation, that does not mean other types of weathering agents they remain calm and quiet. So, all those three types of weathering they may work together to fragment a rock. Okay. So, that is why physical weathering or mechanical weathering, chemical weathering and biological weathering both may work simultaneously to fragment a rock to penetrate the earth surface. But this dominance of one type of weathering over other, that depends upon the latitude, depending upon the altitude, depending upon this rock composition, depending upon the environmental conditions. So, all those factors they together work and finally define what type of weathering will dominate at what type of environmental condition. Similarly, in geological past, if you reveal the geological history of this earth, many times we have noticed climate change. So, these climatic changes that defined what type of weathering will be dominant at that time. At present scenario also, for example, if you take the Indian context, in the upper reaches in the Himalayan system, when the upper part where the glacial system is dominating, that part is dominated by glacial weathering. Similarly, in central Indian part or the peninsular part, river erosion. In the coastal part, we have marine erosion, and in the coastal near coast, we have interaction of water as well as rocks. So, there will be chemical weathering will be there. Similarly, in hilly terrains where there are rooted plants are there, there is biological weathering. So, in arid region there is physical weathering like the third desert, it is physical or mechanical weathering. So, different type of geological environment, it creates different type of weathering environment. So, together physical, chemical, biological weathering working 24/7 to make the surface peneplane. Now, we will discuss what is the reason behind the physical or mechanical weathering. There are different points, different rock properties, different environment properties are responsible for this type of physical or mechanical weathering. One of these prominent reason for this mechanical weathering is pressure release or onloading. What does it mean? Pressure release or onloading? We see most of these rocks, except the sedimentary rocks, most of these rocks like this igneous and metamorphics, they were formed much below the earth crust. So, you take for example of granite. Granite, it is a plutonic rock, that means occur below subsurface. So, once this granite was formed in a geological environment which is a high temperature and pressure environment, but contrast to basalt, basalt forms at the surface, but it is a high temperature phenomena. So, now the question arises, if a rock is forming at high pressure and temperature environment below the earth crust, so once due to tectonic upliftment or due to removal of the overburden, the system comes to the surface. So, that means it is not able to withstand the superficial pressure and temperature condition. So, that is why there will be weathering, it tried to adjust, but weathering will be dominated. Why? Because the existing superficial temperature and pressure condition is not suitable for these rocks. That is why if you see here in this case, we have a granite body, a dome type of granite body, and finally, we are getting some fragments are there. So, this is physical weathering due to pressure unloading, because we are unloading the system, we are removing the overburden, we are uplifting the system. So, these rocks which are earlier present at the subsurface, once it is coming to the surface, it is a low pressure condition, this type of weathering occurs here. On pressure release, rock expands 0.1 to 0.8%. So, the rocks of great depth once exposed to the surface are more prone to weathering than the rocks at the shallow depth. So, here the question arises, those rocks which occur at great depth like the granite, they are more prone to weathering as compared to basalt which is formed near to the surface, but exceptions are there. Basalt, if you see, compositional difference is there, but if you compare with this rhyolite, granite and rhyolite, granite occurs at great depth and rhyolite occurs at the surface. Compositionally both are more or less same. So, if we put granite and rhyolite together, granite will weather fast as compared to rhyolite, because rhyolite occurs at the superficial conditions. So, its pressure and temperature is more or less same, but in the granite it will weather fast. Here some of these figures that is illustrating how the pressure release weather the rocks profiles. Now, you see here unloading of the pressure. Earlier you imagine this was the thickness of overburden when this deep granitic pluton was formed here. Now, with some reason we have removed the overburden, there is no overburden here. So, this rock will expand to the surface, because once the rock was inside, the overburden pressure was downward moving, but now overburden we removed. Finally, the rock will try to expand itself. So, due to expansion, if you see here, due to expansion we have certain cracks, certain fractures which we are generating parallel to the surface. This is very important to note it here, that these fractures, these weak planes of this rock that developed parallel to the surface. So, once the parallel to the surface the rocks occur, you see these are the parallel to the surface, these cracks are developed, and finally, once geological times goes on, these type of structures are dominated on this rock. These are called sitting joints. Sitting joints, sit means planar surface, sitting joints. And sitting joints generally occurs near to the surface and parallel to the topography. Near to the surface and parallel to the topography. Now the question arises, if it is near to the surface, so do we find sitting joints in the same rock body at the depth? The answer is no. Why? Because once we are moving, for example here, once we are moving downward, again this rock pressurizes at this rock which is lying below. So, that is why it is the same condition what it was in geological past. That is why sitting joints are very near surface phenomena, about 200 meters from surface below or so. So, in the same rock, if we are going down, we will not get any sitting joints. Due to pressure release, distinct set of joints develop on the rocks, that is called sitting joints or exfoliation. Sitting joints are parallel to the land surface and form concentric shell of layers up to a few feet in thickness. Spacing in joint increase with depth, that is very important to remember here. Spacing of joint is increase with depth. That means, I want to say, in a same granitic body near to the surface, if you see, this spacing of the joints will be very small. That means, thin sheet of rock fragment, thin sheet of granite that will form near to the surface. However, if you move down to depth, certain depth of this granitic body, gradually the thickness of the sheets increases, and finally, if you moving further downward, you will not find those type of sheets. They rarely extend more than few hundreds of feet or meters from the surface, and it is mostly seen 200 meter is the limit, arbitrary limit. It is not that 200, after 200 meter you will not get anything, or above the 200 meter you will get everything, of everything means sitting joints. So, that means I want to say it is up to 200 meter from the surface, most of these sitting joints are seen in the rocks, and sittings are best seen in granite and massive quartzite. If you see these two figures here, this is a granite body and this is a massive quartzite body, and here if you see, these are the sitting joints they are occurring. So, granite and massive quartzite, they are prone to weather, mechanical weathering is dominant, they are prone to weather sheet wise, this is called sitting joints. Why? Because granite, it is a plutonic rock which is formed at the depth, at greater depth. Similarly, massive quartzite is derived from sandstone, it is a metamorphic product, and metamorphism occurs at great depth which converts sandstone to quartzite. So, once these two rocks, once they occur below the subsurface at greater temperature and pressure condition, once they expose to the surface, they have to adjust themselves with the existing superficial and pressure temperature condition. That is why the removal of this overburden, once they come to the surface, removal of the overburden occurs, that is why they try to expand, they try to expand themselves, and once they try to expand themselves, these type of joints, these type of cracks develop from the surface. That is why granite and massive quartzites, they are more prone to develop sitting joints. As contrast to these rocks which are formed near to the surface or on the surface, they do not show development of sitting joints. Very classical example of mechanical weathering by pressure release is the Alps in Switzerland. If you see this data, Switzerland has suffered 30 kilometer denudation of Alps for last 30 million years, one of the most rapid rate of reported loss of mountain front so far. So, that means the length of this Alps, it has reduced 30 kilometer for last 30 kilometer in its last 30 million years due to this pressure release or unloading, pressure unloading. Probably sitting giants occur near to the land surface because geothermal gradient decreases to much less than the normal in outer 200 meter, and the crust, the temperature of this rock becomes nearly constant. Geothermal gradient, you know, if you remember, geothermal gradient is the temperature increment per kilometer once we move from surface of this earth to subsurface. In general, 25 degree Celsius per kilometer is the geothermal gradient, but this is not holds good at the plate boundaries. At plate boundaries, exceptions are over there, always there, and you will find more than 25 degree per Celsius at the plate boundaries. So, now the geothermal gradient decreases much less in normal in the outer 200 meter, and the overburden pressure however continues to decrease a rate proportional to the rate at which overlying rock is purely peeled out by erosion. So, that means here pressure release is more as compared to temperature changes. So, pressure plays here the major role as compared to temperature. So, now if you see here in this figure, here we have joints, and gradually if you see the joints become discontinuous, finally there is no joint in this region, there is no joint. That means, once we are moving downward, the sitting joints are gradually vanishing, but sitting joints very close to the surface, they are more prominent, and most of these hilly terrains, the steep sides, they are prone to slide due to sitting joints. When we will talk about the mass movement, we will talk elaborately how this behaves as a medium, or it helps the rocks to slide down and formation of mass movement. And once the pressure is released, the temperature more or less remains constant, no compensating contraction occurs. Why? Due to decreased temperature, it is possible at shallow depth. So, expansion is the dominant phenomena here. The rock try to expand, it is depressurized. So, when temperature more or less remain constant. So, due to depressurization, it try to expand, that is why these sitting joints are developed. And once sitting joints are developed, there should be sheet type of appearance, there should be sheet type of erosion. Why the rocks are fragmented here? Due to physical weathering, other types of physical weathering. Once the sheet is formed, then they are very easy to fragment them. There is biological weathering, there is physical mechanical weathering, they are dominating on that sheets. So, finally, make into fragments. Suppose a rock is irregularly fractured in the subsurface. Irregular fracture means, suppose there is a rock mass with this much size fragment and rock mass of this much size fragment of different size. For example, here it is given. Once you see, suppose once we are sitting a rock, one sheet the surface area is this much, another same sheet, same surface area, but we are creating into different smaller fragments and we depressurize it. Once we depressurize it, that means those small fragments, they will readjust themselves, but the larger fragments, it retains the strain within it, So, it will try to expand, and once it try to expand, this type of sheet will generate, because the smaller fragmented rock, which is very small fragments, they will readjust themselves according to the release of pressure. However, the larger rock bodies, they are not able to adjust. That is why they want to release the strain due to release of overburden, and finally, they will try to expand upward. But portions with few wide or widely spaced fragment store the stress for extension until the overburden pressure is so low that failure occurs. Such failure is parallel to the land surface at a depth of 100 meters or less. Very prominent example is given here, how the small fragments and large fragments on the subsurface, they react with the overburden pressure release. So, that is why those rocks which are very intact, less fragment, they are more prone to develop sitting joints as compared to fractured rocks. So, the sitting joints follow closely to local topography. What does it mean? Close to local topography. If you see these two figures, this is a granitic dome, this is also a granitic dome, and here these are the sitting joints. Local topography, if you see this is a profile, if you draw a profile, the profile will be like this, and the sitting joints, if you see the sitting joints, the shape of the sitting joints, that will be at the same as the topography. Similarly, here the profile will be like this, here the sitting joints, they are also arranged like this. So, it follows the topographic, the profile of this topography. Okay. So, the size of these monolithic domes is determined largely by the spacing of faults, joints and sitting, but the shape is determined by sitting. So, that is why the topography, the whole topography, if you take this profile, once we release the overburden, whatever the sitting joints will develop, those sitting joints also follow the topographic profile. So, that is why I can say the sitting joints, they develop due to pressure release, and the sitting joints, they are very close to the surface and they follow the topographic boundary, and those rocks which are formed at greater depth, they are more prone to generate sitting joints as compared to the rocks which are formed near to the surface, and this is a prominent phenomena of mechanical or physical weathering. So, thank you, we will meet in the next class.